Thank you, Father Thomas. First of all, I would like to apologize for my English, which is not as fluent as I would like, but I think it will be sufficient for our communication. It is important and for me to say, first of all, that I'm an astronomer. And for this reason, my approach is more centered on science than on other aspects. But I must say that it is also maybe one of my expectations for this meeting, for this lecture, that this lecture can stimulate interest in studying the figure of Angelo Secchi, even from the philosophical or theological point of view. So I think it is also a very good opportunity also for maybe go into details for other aspects that I cannot, of course, because I'm not the competence for this, I cannot study enough. Anyway, I must say that Angelo Secchi was very, oh, it is blocked. Sorry, I just must try again to do this. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that Angelo Secchi can be defined as a sort of problematic figure. And this is because of many reasons. First, because he was involved in many religious and philosophical controversies, and also in scientific quarrels, and also in political and or institutional conflicts. Of course, I have not time enough to speak about all this, but I just give some ideas and some concepts about this problematic aspects of the figure of Angelo Secchi. And I must also mention that recently there were biographical studies on his figure. You have mentioned the biography, Decoding the Stars, but also other books were published recently in Italian and in English. And this has stimulated the interest to this important astrophysicists and scientists in general, who gave important contributions in the field in many fields of sciences. And I would like to organize my lecture following these steps. First of all, I would like to present briefly the context of his time, the scientific and historical context of his time, which was not easy, and also give a short biographical profile and the scientific activities, and also what difficulties he met inside and outside the church, and his position in some scientific and philosophical debate, and concluding by talking about the modernity of his personality. First of all, the scientific, philosophical, and political context of the time. It was a very complicated time. Angelo Secchi lived in the full time of positivism, and positivism, of course, had a great influence in science. And he lived in a time where, for instance, about astronomy, positivism was a vision which was immediately broken by some important discoveries made in around the half of the 19th century. But according to Comte, astronomy was just restricted to geometrical and mechanical phenomena. And this was proved not to be true, because around the half of the 19th century, when physics was applied to astronomy, it became possible also to know much about the chemical composition of the celestial bodies. So this view of the positivism is also in interest in a sort of crisis for these new discoveries. But it is also a time where astronomy was very conservative, and astronomers were not open to this introduction of new techniques in astronomy. They have a sort of purist idea that astronomy should be only connected to the study of celestial motions. And everything else that can be learned about the heavenly bodies is not properly of astronomical interest. This is a view by Bessel, one of the most important astronomers of the beginning of the first half of the 19th century. But even at the end of the century, we find Otto Friedmann von Struve, who was astronomer in Pulkovo, St. Petersburg, and he also says that astrophysical investigations are far from the standard of scientific accuracy possessed by classical astronomy. God forbid that astronomy should be carried away by fascination with novelty and diverge from its essential basis, which has been sanctified for centuries. It is a very conservative view, of course, not open to new techniques, not open to new to novelties in science and in astronomy in this case. And it is also not only in astronomy, but also in other fields of science. There are new ideas circulating. For instance, in physics, new physics theories, atomism and kinetic theory of gases, and the ideas of Mendeleev and Maxwell and Boltzmann. But it is also in biology, the time of evolutionism. In 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and also in geology. So there is a great debate about the Earth's age. So it's a very rich century. It's a century in ferment, with many ideas circulating. And Secchi was interested to all these aspects. He was interested to what was modern at that time. New ideas were very attractive for him. He had a very open-minded attitude towards these novelties. But it is also a very complicated time from the historical and political point of view, because Italy at that time underwent a process of political unification with many revolutions inside the pre-unitarian states. And of course, this involved and affected very much the life of Secchi, because he lived in Rome. Rome was the capital of the Papal States, and in that century there is the end of the Papal States. So it's also a very complicated time from the political point of view. What happened, especially from this point of view in Italy and the Catholic Church? Of course, all the revolutions which prepared the political unification of Italy and the birth of the Kingdom of Italy, and also the reaction of the Church to the Kingdom of Italy, to the unification, until the annexation of Rome to the Kingdom of Italy, and the expropriation of the properties of the church around the end of the century. So it is a very complicated time, even for the Catholic Church, and even for, of course, for religious in Italy. Of course, all this also had as a consequence the difficult relationship between the Italian government and the Pope. And Secchi was more or less in the middle of this conflict, because he was a very appreciated scientist, and so his collaboration was precious for the Italian scientists. But he was also a Jesuit, a man of the church, and he was in the middle of many diplomatic accidents and controversies. Now I would like to give you a short biographical profile of Angelo Secchi. He was born in Reggio Emilia in a middle-class family. He entered at the age of 15 the initiate of the Society of Jesus in Rome, and he was sent to teach physics at the Collegio Romano to achieve his theological studies. And in 47 he was ordered priest, and but the year after, in 1838, because of the revolutions, the Jesuits were invited by the Pope to leave Italy and to go on voluntary exile abroad. And he spent a few months in the United Kingdom at the Jesuit College of Stonyhurst, and then more or less 1 year at the Georgetown College in Washington, the United States. These two sojourns were very important for the formation of Secchi, because increases this attitude to be open-minded, and also he had the opportunity to meet scientists and scientific personalities, important scientific personalities in the United States. For instance, he started to have some relationships, some connections, and some correspondence with important scientists of that time. And in 1849, he went back. The political situation became again stable, and the Jesuits can come back to Rome, and he became, he was appointed director of the Collegio Romano Observatory because of the early death of the previous director. And he also, a few years later, he obtained the permission to move the observatory and to build a new observatory from the Tower Calandrelli, where it was before, at the beginning, to the roof of St. Ignatius Church. And he installed the previous instruments, but also a new instrument, a very beautiful refractor telescope, which he had the opportunity to purchase thanks to a legacy from one of his assistants. And he starts a very modern scientific program for his astronomical research. In 1870, because of the annexation of Rome to the Kingdom of Italy, of course, the political situation changed. He was invited by the Italian government to help the chair of astrophysics at the University della Sapienza, but because of some conflicts, diplomatic conflicts between the government, Italian government, and the Pope, he was forced by obedience to his superiors to renounce to this chair. It was a very difficult moment for him at that time. And also from 1870 on, he always lives in this in a very precarious state, where he has not idea what is his future. he lived the risk of losing the observatory because of the expropriation, the risk of confiscation. However, thanks to his scientific authority, which was well recognized by the people at that time, he was confirmed director of the observatory thanks to a special decree from the Italian government. But in 1878, he died in Rome before his 60th birthday. He's a very well-known scientist, and he gave important contribution in many scientific fields. But of course, he's mostly known as an astrophysicist, because he was really one of the fathers of the modern astrophysics. And he was a very prolific writer and authors of many articles and books. And he had really many scientific interests, going from astronomy to astrophysics, to meteorology, geomagnetism, oceanography, and geodesy, and even his hobbies like paleontology, archaeology, mnemonics. He gave also contributions in these fields. Of course, the common denominator was physics, because Secchi is a physicist before being an astronomer, and his background is in physics, and this has marked very deeply all his scientific activity, because his approach is always that of a physicist, of an experimental physicist. He liked to build by himself his instruments, to modify instruments. So it's very attentive to the application of physics. And this is just a small list of the most important contribution he gave in these fields, but of course there are many others which I cannot mention, but it is a really very interesting figure, especially for this wide spectrum of interests, of course. However, he is mostly known because of his contribution to astrophysics. Why? Because he was very attentive to the application and development of new techniques and instruments. He was a specialist. He was one of the first astronomers who used photography and spectroscopy in astronomy. And these were two new techniques which were developing in those years. And he immediately recognized the potential of the use of these new techniques, and that this can change the astronomy. And also he extended and consolidated the knowledge about the physical and chemical nature of the celestial objects, especially his contributions in solar physics were very important. And in the end, he contributed to the acknowledgement of the status of scientific discipline for astrophysics, because there were many resistance to accept astrophysics as a separate scientific discipline from astronomy. And all the activity and the work made by Secchi contributed to identify astrophysics as a separate discipline from astronomy. At the Collegio Romano Observatory, his arrival was a very important, make very important changes, especially in publications, because he started with many important publications, and especially new publications. For instance, the Bollettino Meteorologico, which was conceived as a modern bulletin for circulating the scientific news. Secchi was convinced of the importance of circulating scientific information, and also for circulating fast this information. Otherwise, it is, the news became obsolete. And for this reason, he published this monthly bulletin where you can find any information about astronomy and other sciences, just for help diffusion of the scientific culture in not only in the scientific context, but also in a wide context, of popularizing in some sense also science. And he was mainly known because of his contribution to his study in spectroscopy. Spectroscopy, of course, was a scientific discipline dating back to the beginning of the 19th century, because Fraunhofer was the first who observed the presence of dark lines in the sunlight when it is dispersed through a glass prism. But of course, he cannot identify the nature of these dark lines. And later, Kirchhoff and his collaborators in Heidelberg, they formulated the radiation laws, and they identified these dark lines as produced by the chemical elements which are in the solar atmosphere. So they could map the spectrum and identify which chemical elements are in the sun. So, and this idea of observing the spectra, the stars, was first an idea of an Italian astronomer in Florence, Giovan Battista Donati. He recognized that there was a connection between the kind of spectra and the color of the stars. He recognized that, for instance, white stars have similar spectra, and yellow, orange, and red stars have also similar spectra. And this is a sort of basic idea that Secchi used to formulate a classification of the star, one of the first spectral classification of stars. This is maybe the most important contribution that Secchi gave to astrophysics, because his classification in three types, in three classes. Then he added a fourth class in 1869, and then also another fifth type in, just before his death. So he had this idea that the stars are maybe maybe in his mind there is also an idea of evolution of the stars, but he could not study, didn't have time enough to develop this idea. Anyway, he recognized that there was this connection, and also classified the thousands of stars starting from their spectrum. The classification was the base of all the following classification, especially the most important, the classification made at Harvard, the United States, where Edward Pickering, starting from Secchi classification, developed a new classification, which is still in use today. Secchi gave important contribution also to solar physics. He participated in a astronomical expedition in Spain to observe the total solar eclipse in 1860, and for the first time he used photography. The idea was to photograph the totality phase of the eclipse. And these photographs, which he obtained, was very important because in another station, the English astronomer Warren de la Rue also made some photographs, and the comparison of these two sets of photographs could clarify and confirm that solar prominences are phenomena which are really pertaining to the sun, not just optical illusions. So this is a very important, this was a very important result of this application of photography to the eclipse. Secchi also developed some instruments for measuring the solar radiation, which is a sort of prototype of the modern bolometer, which were developed around the end of the century by Langley. And he also participated in other expedition to Sicily to observe another total solar eclipse in 1870, and this time it was a very important eclipse because he had the opportunity to start a collaboration with an astronomer in Palermo, Pietro Tacchini, who had the same telescope. The Merz Equatorial in Palermo was a telescope which was more or less the same size and the same firm of the telescope which Secchi used in Rome, so they could compare the results of their observation, having the same instrument. And starting from this, they observed the sun and observed, especially spectroscopically, observed the solar prominences, and they tried also to classify solar prominences. And starting from this collaboration, they decided to establish a sort of network of observers that can monitor the sun and the sunspots and prominences, etc. And from this idea, they established the Italian Spectroscopical Society, which is the first astrophysical society. And they had a scientific program made of solar monitoring, and they published the memoir of this society, which is today are considered the first astrophysical journal ever published. And Secchi was one of the most important contributors to this memoir. I just mentioned some important contributions also in the field of meteorology, because Secchi was also very active in this field. He invented the first meteorological network in the Papal States, and also sort of weather warning service just for forecasting and prevent storms or other meteorological events which can also provoke damages to people or to ships or no. And he was also a member of the Italian Commission for the National Meteorological Network Coordination. So the Italian government used the Secchi expertise to build another meteorological network, and he also invented instruments. This is the meteorograph, which is a very important instrument. It is considered the prototype of the modern automatic recording machines which recorded all the
Okay. Ileana, are you still there? Oh, looks like you're muted briefly. I think you're muted still.
1 second, I need to unmute.
Let's see. Ileana, are you there? Let's see here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I think it's yeah. I think we're good. The connection's been a little bit on and off, but I think it's been manageable.
There was some kind of problem with the connection. Okay.
Very good.
Okay. So this was another important contribution. This meteorograph was a sort of prototype of automatic recording machines. It recorded all the meteorological parameters at the same time, so temperature and pressure and humidity and wind and rain. So, and it was also awarded. Oh, again, I have a problem with. Sorry, I have to. Because. Okay.
The joys of technology.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this instrument was awarded the Grand Prix at the Universal Exhibition in Paris in 1867. Of course, this increased enormously the popularity of Secchi abroad. And he was very prolific also in writing treatises. For instance, this is just the list of the most important. The first one was a very important book of physics on the unity of physical forces. This was a very controversial book, as we shall see in a few minutes. And also another book was regarding the sun and also about the stars and also about the Earth physics. You can see also how many editions and translations of these books. So they were really successful books. But maybe you can also see that no English translation of these books. And this was also another problem. There was some kind of opposition from the English astronomers. It is not easy. Why? Maybe also for religious prejudices. This is to be much more explored in depth. But there was a sort of veto about the publication of Secchi in England. On the contrary, in the United States, they were published, they were mentioned and circulated very much. This is the book on the sun, one of the most beautiful treatises on solar physics of the time. This is the book on the stars. This is the book of the terrestrial physics. This is maybe the most delicate point, the opposition that he met outside and inside the church. The opposition outside the church is easy to understand. He was a Jesuit and he lived in an anti-clerical time. So there was many opposition against him as a Jesuit, as a representative of the obscurantism of the church, etc. And he also lived in the middle of very violent attacks against Jesuits and against religious people. This is an anonymous letter sent to him, which is a sort of threatening letter. We pray the Reverend Angelo Secchi to leave us in peace. We respect his person as a renowned Italian astronomer, but we hate Jesuit. This is, I think, in this phrase, in this sentence, there is really what was the context in which he lived. He was respected as a scientist. He was hated as a Jesuit. So it was really in the middle of a crossfire. And he also sometimes speak about this. We are offended openly every day by the public press. There are infamous calumnies against us. We have seen the fire at our doors. So this gives them an idea of the difficult context in which he lived. And also, when he first accepted and then renounced the chair of astrophysics, he was again attacked by the anti-clerical, and he was also attacked by the ultra-conservatism Catholics, because his acceptation of the chair was considered as a sort of complicity with the Italian government. And he wrote, "My distress with what is said about me is beyond every limit. But in front of God, I know that I have not failed, and this is comforting for me." He had done everything in obedience to his superiors, and it was for him it was comforting. Yeah, I know that I have not failed. And however, he was during his participation to in 1875 to the National Congress. So he was also very strongly attacked because that was considered a sort of Congress of heretic people, in the sense that there was the participation of, for instance, of the famous philosopher, French philosopher, Ernest Renan, who wrote Life of Jesus, where he was openly anti-clerical, anti-religious, and of course the same participation, the participation of Secchi was interpreted as a sort of complicity also with these heretic people. And he wrote in his diary, "I condemn myself to not to go around, to stay always in my room." But even in this case, there were people that have talked about me for invite. And one of the most interesting controversies is with Vincenzo Nardini. Vincenzo Nardini was a Dominican, an Italian Dominican, and he has published some works about mechanicism and atomism. And he has attacked one of the Jesuits who was also was Giorgi, who was a supporter also of the atomism. And Secchi reacted to this with the publication of a booklet intorno alla soluzione di un problema fisico-cosmologico, and where he examined the discussion made by Nardini and context and give some explanation. And Nardini replied to him in another publication, a risposta del padre Vincenzo Nardini alla lettera del padre Angelo Secchi, and all the controversy developed around 1862. And in the end, Secchi tried to explain that there was some kind of a confusion between physics and metaphysics. So when we were talking about mechanicism and atomism, we have to specify if we are talking about physics or about metaphysics. And about 2 years later, it was even worse, because he published the book on the unity of physical forces, and one of the Jesuits, Giovanni Maria Cornoldi, which was one of the founders of the Neo-Thomism movement, published I sistemi meccanico e dinamico circa la costituzione dei corpi, where he openly attacked Secchi. And he sent also this booklet to Secchi, writing to him, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't agree on these important questions." And Secchi reacted very, very violently to this booklet. "I have long hesitated if I should answer you. I'm doing it because I believe that the time has come to abolish an abomination glittering through the church. You tend to believe that nobody can be Catholic if it doesn't retain the materia prima and at the total of peripateticity. You have become a champion of this sect. This does immense damage and is the only one that justifies the great cry of the unbelievers that the church is opposed to science. Because of such follies, we are all insulted, mocked, and trampled. It is time to put an end to the sect that pretends to exhibit papal infallibility to support its own personal truth and hide its ignorance. I myself am a victim of your foolishness. I tell you, it's time for it to end. As you can read, it is very strong reaction. And he also speak about this to another astronomer, Schiaparelli, who was his friend in Milano, and he speaks about this group of people who were against him. Lately, a kind of cult or something like that has been formed. They want to resurrect the most ridiculous, peripatetic philosophy. Certain recent articles published by them were really disgusting for me. What is certain is that their doctrines are neither Jesuitic nor Catholic at all, but a fruit of their brain. It's a very, very strong position. They consider me as an amateur, and my poor conversation on the unity of physical forces were represented by them as a work not only full of errors, but also dangerous for faith. And it is not surprising that during the Vatican Council first, a pamphlet circulated, petitions to the very reverend fathers of the council for the abolition of the Collegio Romano Observatory. Contra Astronomicum in Collegio Romano Observatorium sub direzione celebris Jesuit Angelo Secchi. It's an attack to him. It should be, you can read, it's really impressioning. It should be stopped at too generous tolerance and warn the Roman Observatory and for it Father Secchi, who is its life representative, to cease the effects of his elucubration and to demonstrate that the bases of modern astronomy are false and erroneous. You would examine if they are exorcism quite powerful to completely purify those ruining machineries, to be sure that every satanic influence is eliminated when using them, and that no danger derives from this exorcism to the Holy City. It's really, of course, it's an incredible reaction. So again, against Secchi, of course, and it is a very with a typical humor, because Secchi was a person with much humor. He tried to describe this situation. I believed that in order to stay on trouble in the world, it suffices not to bother anyone and to deal with things of distant worlds. But I see that although I have done thus, I have not succeeded. One person tortures me with superlative and unmerited praises, making me ridiculous. Someone else rocks me by stretching scriptures to make me appear blasphemous or redolent. I mean, one person slams a sensor on my nose to his advantage, while another one drags me through the mud. It would be foolish to reply to all. And this is a very interesting also passage. Why someone see disbelief and atheism in my writings, others see and abhor the Bible. One person he expected, another does not find the physics of St. Thomas. To the latter, I will only say that physics has progressed a little since St. Thomas. And if St. Thomas had been in our times, he would not have adopted the physics that he did adopt, but the physics that is in use in schools nowadays, just as he adopted then the one in use in those days. This gentleman want me to pass for a metaphysician, which I neither am nor claim to be. Despite its progresses, however, science has not been able to get rid of God, and those who hope that science would, as well as their successor, will never obtain this. I just mentioned very briefly some of his position about the most debated themes of that time, for instance, about evolutionism. The idea of consecutive transformations taken with appropriate moderation is not incompatible either with reason or religion. In effect, if we do not consider everything as carried out by pure inner forces of the brute matter, but we admit that these forces come from the first reason who created matter and gave it the power to produce such effect, there is no intrinsic repugnance to believe that until the intervention of a new force, some organism could develop themselves in one way rather than in another, thus originating different beings. But when a series of these beings passes to another one containing a new principle, then things change. It is impossible to pass from the vegetable without sensitivity to the animal having sensation, without a new power that cannot come from either organization or matter alone. You can say this even more when we pass from the brute animal to the man, who thinks, reflects, and has a conscience. A new principle must then be associated to the physical forces of matter to produce these results. Another interesting view is about the pluralism, about the existence of life in the universe. Creation is not a simple mass of incandescent matter. It's a wonderful organism where, when the incandescence ceases, life starts. Even though it may be inaccessible to our telescopes, nonetheless, by analogy with our globe, we are able to conclude that it exists in others. The atmospheric constitution of the other planets, so similar to ours, as well as that of the stars, so similar to that of the sun, convince us that those celestial bodies are in a stage similar to the current one of our system, or are running a stage that is has already passed, or is destined to pass. In the immense variety of creatures that have existed and exist in our planet, we may argue the diversity of those that might exist there. Life fills the universe, and intelligence is associated to life. And since many beings inferior to us exist on Earth, in other conditions, many other beings more capable than us might exist. It would be a very restricted view, however, to suppose that every celestial body is inhabited like ours. It is with a sweet sentiment that man thinks of these numberless worlds where each star is a sun, which is today totally accepted from the astronomical point of view, that as a minister of divine bounty distributes life and goodness to other innumerable beings who are blessed by the hands of the Omnipotent. And also other about the advancement of science, how it is important to make conjectures and not to fabricate words based on our imagination. I go fast, and I think that we can conclude with the modernity of his thought and his personality. First is modern view of science. He has the idea that science must be open to new technologies and theories and ready to explore unconventional paths. And for instance, he decided to dedicate the new observatory to physical astronomy, which was almost neglected by the other observatories. He immediately recognized that it was a new path to follow, and he decided to introduce in the Collegio Romano Observatory spectroscopy and photography, physical astronomy, what he called it. He also had an idea that science should be cooperative. Science needs to be made as a network with collaborations. It's far from being the alone scientist working inside this room. No, it's very open to collaboration. And for instance, when they established the Italian Spectroscopic Society, he is the first that had this idea. Small groups should be recruited for drawing the prominences, and also proposed who, maybe Temple from Milano, maybe someone from Naples, and Respighi from Rome. Is a source of, he liked to build the communities and build also scientific communities, which is a very interesting aspect of this work. He also has the idea that science must be at the service of the people, at the service of the, he was involved in many public works. He improved the time signal system, for instance, and also the cartography of the papal states, and also made the daily telegraphic dispatch for the forecasting, and also improved the system of lighthouses for the ports of the papal states. He wrote some guidelines for seismic prevention, and also installed the lightning rods for the Roman monuments, and also designed some fire safety system for the Basilica of St. Paul, and also introduced wanted to create some electrical railways in the Papal State. He had the idea that the Papal State should be a modern state with technology at the service of the people. And this is the idea that science must be useful and must be also for the benefit of the people, of the citizen. It's also sort of a runner of many of the concepts that today we use, that of the citizen science, the involvement of people in science, or for instance, for the idea of public outreach. So it was really very modern in many of his ideas. The idea that science should be no profit. When he was invited to make some adjustment for some instrument by paying a taxes, he said, no, the observatory never will receive these taxes. If the public government wanted to put a tax, okay, but not for us. They can take this just because science has no profit. You don't have to have money from your scientific activity. It is at the service of the others. You cannot have a profit from this. And also the science is suitable for all. He was a very active speaker. He made public lectures for everybody. He wrote that he made conferences in favor of workers, society. He went to colleges, schools to make physics courses. And what is very interesting is also that he was very open also for the education of girls. Catholic girls should be properly educated in general for the rule of the houses, but also because there are some of them who have been placed by Providence in a condition to manage an employed person in the future, and it is necessary that this education is suitable to become self-confident and to gain some esteem publicly, so that they will be respected and have authority. So it's a modern idea also with the concept of the dignity of women, of course. So it's and he was very active in this. He was in the female colleges and also make scientific course lessons there. And also very modern science religion view. True faith is not opposed to science. This is a very beautiful image. Both are rays of the same sun, aimed at illuminating the way to truth to our blind and weak minds. Deprived of this noble purpose, these studies are mere curiosities and often just result in pain or at least unrewarding struggles. It is stimulating to consider how it is wonderful to show the Creator's work, even when any other excitement fades away. This raises the mind over the major reality of the calculations and makes these struggles a sublime and divine work. Science is a gift from God. Profane studies, by opening the mind, facilitate the intelligence of the divine things. Heavens show the Lord's glory, and the wildflower and the small flying insect show his endless wisdom. But the intelligence itself is a gift from God. Every potential knowledge comes from God. It is therefore a gift from God, also the intelligence of the sciences, and this is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. We could then courageously, but also rightfully, ask God for this gift. Ask the light of intellect for understanding the Lord's work, for knowing His greatness and our obligations. The Pope Pius IX was very friend of Secchi. Always a great estimate him, and also he defined an excellent Jesuit science and religious virtue, and the most important virtues were humility and obedience, and also his confrere Ferrari and Marchetti all along his life and scientific career. He did not look for other than the honor and the defense of the Catholic Church, showing clearly how science and Christian faith can be joined. Of course, I have no time to speak about the scientific legacy, which was completely forgotten in Italy, but I developed in the United States, where George L. Hale was considered as the heir of Secchi, in the sense that developed the astrophysical and solar researches there. But an ideal legacy was also the establishment of the Vatican Observatory, which was also established by Pope Leo XIII with this sort of apologetic intent to demonstrate that the Church is not opposed to science. And it is a very strange. I would like to mention that also the Secchi also an interesting popularity in literature. It is mentioned by Engels in his Dialectic of Natures, and also by Jules Verne in Batmars in his one of the roman, and also by Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code. So it's a very strange, but we can, and what was most surprising for me, that also a Russian poet, Arseny Tarkovsky, wrote a poem dedicated to Secchi. So it's really incredible. And I would like to conclude with this definition that he gave of himself. He brought the flavor of physics into astronomy and is considered one of the most active and successful founders of this branch of modern astronomy. And I like this prayer, because this is a sort of prayer. I would like to conclude with this prayer, which Secchi wrote. We therefore address ourselves to the Lord of the sciences, and especially to the very holy person of the very holy Trinity, whose task is properly that to light up our intellect. We appeal to him to be illuminated, as we do not ask this intelligence for our vanity, but to learn how to love and serve him from the knowledge of him and his works. May he, the Holy Spirit, visit our minds, all open to him. May this gift be accompanied by the highest grace, which renders us friends of God and his worldliness. You, Paraclete Counselor, console our souls from the bitterness which is often the fruit of our struggles and studies. May you, precious gift of the highest and divided Trinity, living source of great science, fire of true love, those who always you link to your charity. May you illuminate our minds with your light and our hearts with your ardor, and give us fortitude and courage to overcome today and forever our rivals. Let our studies be aimed at knowing more and more the Divine Father, the Redemptor's Son, and you. I think they can stop here. Thank you.